Hello and welcome back to another episode of the War Report. Now, of course, last episode we did was a nice little extra covering explicitly the election, which again we still have no clear result on, and probably won't for the foreseeable future, which again we'll report it as the news comes in, and a lot of that news is probably going to move rapidly, so it's probably going to be out of date by the time you hear it. But just briefly, what it looks like now is several states have been contested. Trump's legal battles and calls for recounts and audits are going through, and things seem to be up in the air. Now, of course, media outlets they don't get a final decision on this, but they kind of do in an unofficial capacity. Several have revoked their calls for Joe Biden winning states such as Arizona and Pennsylvania. They haven't done so for states like Michigan or Wisconsin yet. And then Georgia is the other one people have been really focused on. So it seems to be a deadlock right now. Neither side is backing down, and if I had to give it some odds at this point, just a shot in the dark sort of thing, it would be probably 55% chance Biden gets it, but Trump still has a 45% chance, which is still pretty good if you ask me. But I'm expecting Biden to get it, but I won't be surprised in any way at all if Trump can pull it off and reverse this trend. Now, of course, we talked about some of the reasons why he may not have had such a decisive victory this election. Um, it boiled down to the point where he was in a sort of lose-lose situation. Does he go through with his bombastic rhetoric and the sort of actions he threatened to do and alienate a lot of the other voters while pleasing the white men? Or does he alienate the white men while pleasing a lot of the voters by talking a big game and not really doing anything? Again, the sort of solutions he proposed would have worked, I don't know, probably in 2005, 2006, and before, but
Hmm.
just with the cultural narratives and the demographics and everything and the changing in the electorate, what we had was, again, a no win situation. He isolates one part of the electorate or the other. And while I, of course, don't agree with this, of course, I don't even believe in democracy, he took the safer bet in terms of not alienating the white suburban voters, the black voters, especially the Hispanic voters, and another one with that. Again, he gained with all these different groups except white men, who he supposedly lost 5% of. Now, how accurate that'll be by the time all the recounts are done, who honestly knows? Because, again, I have trouble believing any official statistic about this election. But I do believe that maybe not 5%, but to some capacity, a lot of white men did sit this one out because they didn't feel motivated to vote for Trump. Again, these were the despondent people who hadn't voted for president probably since Reagan, if at all, who decided to go out there and stump for Trump, so to speak, and campaign for him, to phone call for him, or even just simply attend a rally and vote for him. These are the kind of despondent people in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, all these states that have seen deindustrialization, opioids. Oh, great, somebody's car alarm's going off. Hold on, guys, let me go just take care. Apologies for that inconvenience, but back to what I was saying. He went over a lot of these despondent voters who had no hope in politics, and Trump was a relatively fresh face, relatively anti-establishment, and they took a chance on him, and to them it didn't pay out. Now, say COVID wouldn't have happened and the economy kept chugging along status quo, yet there were still some racial tensions, he probably still would have done a little better. Or if the inverse happened, there was no racial tensions but COVID, probably still would have done a little better. But the only other thing is he didn't fulfill his promise of being able to really reindustrialize the Rust Belt, the Midwest, as he did. So, talking from
Hmm.
a completely legitimate standpoint, assuming everything about this election or most of it is true, those are probably the reasons why he still could have probably pulled this off. And again, we'll see if he does. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the recounts they find Arizona and Pennsylvania go to Trump. But again, Michigan, and Wisconsin were lost. So it's all up in the air. But I expected Trump, even if he did win, to underperform this election. Uh, sort of like Obama in '08. Now that was also due to changing some electoral votes, losing some states that gone had gone Democrat that don't usually, such as North Carolina and Indiana in '08. They flipped to Romney in 2012. But honestly, I think neither of them were going to come out with a solid majority this election. And you know, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but judging by the sort of map they gave Biden, his electoral victory would also be 306 in the Electoral College, which is what Trump won on election night. However, fun fact, Trump only got 304 of those votes because of faithless electors. A couple defected. And, even funnier, that 2016 Electoral College, Hillary had more electors defect than Trump did. But still, there's just something, again, maybe I'm reading way too much in this, about a complete inverse of the election results, at least in terms of electoral votes. I don't know. I could be on something, maybe not. And we'll see how this all plays out. Again, we only have until December 14th to figure out who the next president is going to be because, the Electoral College meets at that point. And, one of them's got to, I mean, they don't have to concede before then, but we're probably going to have a clear idea of who's going to win this. Don't forget that the 2000 election, Florida wasn't decided until a court case. Bush v. Gore was not until December 12th, 2000. So pretty much Gore challenged the entire time, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Bush. So we'll see how it goes on that end. But if you have any further thoughts about that,
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts. I've run over several scenarios about how Trump could have won or could be leading right now, and so one sort of what everything hinges upon is basically what the votes in 2020 are and what 2020 has gone like. So if we consider the rise in demographics from non-whites voting for Trump, and we look at 2020, then what you have to conclude is that the votes represent a Trump that did not go very hard against the riots, or chose not to, or was impeded. It's a mixture of all those, but his rhetoric was tough, and he found a way to blame, the Democrats for this, and the Democrats do play a role in that. That's honest, especially for BLM. So if you look at it that way, then what you basically conclude is Trump's gains with people of color represents talking tough but not acting tough, and that also represents why he lost a portion of the white male vote, which I think has surprised everybody. And curiously, not many are writing about why, and then in which case, maybe that's because it would kind of show what the political climate is, because what they're saying is that maybe some of the articles I've been reading are that maybe it's not demographics anymore. Maybe, America's divide is between cities and countryside, and so on and so on. Well, it's a mixture of all those three. Race will never not be an issue in America. So it will only change to a few slight degrees. And my argument is, if we look at the votes and we understand what 2020 was like, then you have to ask yourself. So if Trump went really hard the first 2-3 years, the way he promised he would, let's say he was actually building the wall, like a real wall, not doing like little repairs, right? People are ecstatic about the wall. Everybody remembers the memes about the wall, right? So suppose he did that. Well, I mean,
and
Charlottesville,
suppose Mexico paid for it.
right, right. And so, Charlottesville happened, and then all the contractors who were going to go in on it bailed out. That forced him to get the money for the military. So he shut down the government, something which no other president has done for erecting a wall or for the issues of immigration. So let's say he was constructing this thing. Let's say he outweighed, he willed, the American elite machine and, Washington to curb to his will. Let's say I don't know, government cracked after not 2 months being shut down, but like 6 months, right? He caused the crisis, they fold. I mean, it's unbelievable, but let's just say that happens. So now you've got a lot of division already brewing, and you're going to have like people of color with an anger toward him, right, which already existed prior to him winning the election. And then you bring in 2020, his handling of COVID, and then the riots. What is he supposed to do? So now does he go hard on the riots the way he did on all his policies? Like, why do we have to get people from shithole countries? Why can't they come from Norway? Like, let's suppose he really did that, right? Let's say he expanded his immigration ban. Let's say He didn't give his H-1 visas or whatever. Like, let's say he actually did that. Well, I mean, minorities can vote. Like they can vote to cancel a president as well. They can have their own protest vote too. And we saw historic numbers. My argument is that you would have seen at least as high, if not higher, turnout for voting, right? And so maybe he would have gained about that 5% of the men. I think there's like a reasonable argument for that. He would have lost white women, though, because white women increased by 2%. And again, it's for the same reasons: tough rhetoric, but not tough action. And for basically not coming through on anything else that he promised. Right? There's a
Right.
few other things, for charter schools and whatnot. I get it, but we're talking about the main promises. What was really revolutionary? Trump was not going to get unelected based on charter promises and putting judges in the Supreme Court.
Well,
Let's be
you know
honest.
where I think Trump really dropped the ball in terms of like white women and that sort of stuff? Why didn't he just send Mike Pence on a year-long tour of the suburbs? Like, because
Hmm.
you look at his, at least the response to his performance in his debate with Kamala Harris, that uh, like pretty much even conservatives who didn't necessarily like Trump, not necessarily the Never Trumpers, but ones who weren't too keen on Trump but would vote for him begrudgingly, they responded really well to Mike Pence, who was pretty much making a lot of the same points Trump would, being a loyalist that he is, but just saying them in a much more calmer and collected fashion. What you expect from like a 90s or early 2000s era Republican. So I think they really dropped the ball not using him as a proxy for Trump in the areas and with the demographics he might not perform the best with, such again as white suburban women.
Right. I mean, I've seen some articles that are kind of claiming that, and some stuff on Twitter that are basically claiming that Pence was not the loyal ally that people think he was. And that's coming through now. In any case, there's no clear path to victory for Trump in the second term, because the country along demographic lines is just too divided. You can never have a mandate, even for the majority, which is white.
Well,
It simply can't happen. Decades of drift happening, whether it's immigration, whether it's quotas, whether it's the media, decades of drift made this impossible because it entrenched itself both in the Washington political machine. So
oh yes.
he could never, and again, for all we know, you know, Trump was basically there to get certain things done for Israel. He knows there's no second path to victory, or maybe he thought there was. But let's say Kushner knows. Let's say his handlers know, right? That there's no path anyways, and that basically what has to get done is Golan Heights, the embassy in Jerusalem, and basically Israel has carte blanche on the West Bank. All things that Obama was not willing to do in 8 years, and which frustrated Netanyahu. So, for all we know, the thing is well analyzed. I mean, it was Romney's advisor, of course, was told to run on the same platform that Trump was, right? But he refused to do it. Trump didn't refuse to do it, and that's what got him elected. But so maybe that's all there is. Maybe that's all that can happen, because the rest of the Washington machine is just not going to let him do that, right? And again, it's like it's not wrong, I think, to point out what we call what some people call the cathedral, right? It is what is in power all the time. And that's the way. I mean, why are we seeing people literally think that Trump is Hitler? Even before the fiasco that is this election, there are a lot of people who are convinced that Putin actually hacked the voting machines.
Well, he did, didn't he?
We're not just talking about $40,000-$50,000 in Facebook ads. We're talking about he literally hacked the voting machines. He found a way to do it. There were people who thought that they were completely infiltrated, right? And there were some people that even pushed it. like on MSNBC. Uh, so I don't like if we're really being honest. There's no way to get like it's. I guess what I'm saying, it's over, and I think the 5% who voted also know it's over. It's over. There's not going to be an ethno state. We're not going to turn America around. We all know that. There has to be some kind of adaptation, but at the same time, like not accepting people of European descent in America to be victimized.
I think the Trump campaign really went downhill when they didn't release the Hispanics for Trump song sooner. I think if they would have put that out like August,
Almost
September, they like if they were playing that at the Republican National Convention, like Trump would have had like 60% Hispanic support. Believe me.
I mean, if I had to have one scenario where I see him winning, that would be the COVID checks. If a last round of COVID checks were issued, I think he would have won over a significant amount of people from any demographic.
Oh yes.
And if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure it was Mitch McConnell that stopped that, or was Trump also with them? I'm trying to remember that.
McConnell signaled against it and Trump caved, which is uh,
Oh,
again replaced McConnell with Kushner, with Pompeo, with a
right,
multitude of different people, and the story has played out the
right.
same many times throughout the past 4 years.
So I mean, Trump basically screwed himself because for me, that's the most definite path to Trump reelection. Now, reelection isn't going to get the administration that most people elected him wanted, but it gets him reelected. And based on the kind of promises that we're seeing originating out of the Biden camp, um, another 4 years of Trump actually isn't so bad. I wouldn't want to have to read White Fragility if I'm at my new job. I'd rather not. Thank you.
Oh yes, of course
And
that would spill up to the spill over to the Great North, wouldn't it?
right, I wouldn't want the war in Syria to become super hot again the way it was 5 years ago. I wouldn't want those guys being I don't want the jihadis being refinanced. I don't want like another 2 million coming from the Middle East going into Europe.
But do you support Biden's policy of supporting the Kurds? I know I do. Our
Yes.
greatest, our greatest ally, our second greatest ally, excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah. So like you know, it my perspective is larger than America. So there's and of course the Biden campaign already some of the ministers in well, one of the Polish ministers was oh, sorry, he might have been a journalist. Anyways, he interviewed Stoltenberg of NATO, and they're all excited about Biden becoming the next president. And you read the comments, and it's all like, we're going to stamp out, yeah, Tusk and Stoltenberg. We have to stamp out right wing populism in Poland. And you could say, well, right wing populism is Zyokuk. It's like, yeah, I mean, that's where we are right now. But like,
Yeah, but
uh,
the fact that they need to pull it out represents that there's something much worse happening to them. The fact that they even give us that concession.
right, right. So uh, I hope they don't rage quit in Eastern Europe, because it's going to get a hell of a lot worse. Like if the war in Syria breaks open like it was 4 years ago, you're going to or 5 years ago, you're going to expect like the same amount of millions coming through. You're going to have more LGBTQ stuff rammed down everybody's throats. And again, it's very important that like countries do not actually give them the right to parades, because that's a it's all societies know that there is a minority of homosexuals, right? It's something different when it becomes representative in greater society,
Yeah, when it
right?
becomes a virtue
We've seen the
rather
potentials
than
that it's
just
had
a fact of life.
right, right. And this is why Russia, for instance, will not tolerate parades. there are gay clubs. They do meet or whatever, but they cannot. They're not given like any other status than that. So, and we've seen what the fallout has been in the West from that, and the kind of policies, economic policies, even that it determines. So, I mean, we've talked about that before about like the atomization of the individual down to his most base desires, and just basically the history of his country, his fellow men, and all that gone, um, or worse, trying to reinvent it. So, anyways, I mean that's all I've got to say about the election.
Well, you and I may have said our piece, but so have the leaders of the major countries of the world. You brought up Stoltenberg and Tusk, their excitement. Seems like just about everyone under the sun, all the people in the Western Alliance, even so called close friends of Trump, such as Boris Johnson and Bibi Netanyahu, have offered their congratulations and support to Biden and Harris for their victory in this election. The Netanyahu one, it came out right after the Sabbath ended in Israel on Saturday night their time. So that was the first thing Netanyahu said on November 7th. So you have all that. The ones who have either not recognized or held their tongue have been Russia, China, Brazil, Hungary, Poland. So all the countries you would usually expect. Of course, the two major powers don't.
Croatia, Slovenia. I don't know if they've caved, but they were part of that bloc.
I mean, we all know that Melania and Baron are Slovenian agents. Of course, this is all part of the Russian collusion plot, as you'll know. As what was it? What was it that one MSNBC woman said that Trump's first wife was from Soviet Yugoslavia in the Czech
Yeah,
Republic,
yeah,
so something like that. But that's what we were looking at with that, and it seems that a lot of countries in the Western Alliance, even slightly more populous ones, depending on what you want to make of Boris Johnson now after his response to COVID and everything, and some of his immigration policies. But if you still consider him more on like the populist side, again, even like some of the more perhaps better term is right wing leaders are welcoming a Biden presidency with open arms. And as you said, it would be a quote unquote return to normal for a lot of these people. But the other
hmm
thing about that is it will be interesting to see if Biden gets in, which, like I said, I say 55% chance, like just shot in the dark sort of thing, to see the return to normal with what just happened in Armenia, which we'll get into with what's happening in Syria, of course, Iran, Libya, Venezuela, all the major theaters of the world. Biden's relationship with China, how will that go? Will it be a return to Chimerica, or will it be a new Cold War? Which again, we'll probably get into that in the coming weeks here as a victor of the election becomes more clear. But it will be interesting to see them laud the return to normal when I don't attribute this entirely to Trump. I attribute this more to realities outside of Trump or even any American president's control. Just the shift in the geopolitical dynamic of the world in the past 4 to 5 years. I would say even going back past 7 years, probably when Syria got really hot. Again, they're going to be touting the return to normal to a United States whose power on the world stage is very much so depleted. So when Biden gets in there and talks a tough game on Russia, but then only follows through halfway or doesn't follow through at all, I mean, that's going to be pretty confidence breaking. Now, of course, I do think Trump is better for smashing the international institutions, even in an inadvertent way, just because of his temperament and his personality. But even Biden, and Kamala, who are vocal supporters of them, will deal a quite a bit of a blow, not as much in my opinion, to these international institutions by not being able to back up their word just because of the reality of the situation on the ground. Because there's only so much you can realistically do when you're put in this situation. Because Biden might want deeper involvement in Ukraine, but it may just go back to sending lethal or going back to the Obama era policy of non-lethal aid. He may want further involvement in Syria, but that may boil down to just a few thousand troops in the Kurdish-controlled areas instead of an outright regime change war. He may want to re-enter the Iran deal, but Iran spurns him. He may want to bring back Chimerica, but Xi Jinping might say, no, we're better off on our own. You're our rival now. So it will be. I think that'll probably be one of the most interesting things if Biden comes into office. The return to normal seemed to be just roadblocked at every turn because of factors outside of the control of the president.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big plays that I could foresee Biden doing would be with Iran, because like you know, basically on most issues, Iran, China, and Russia get along, but there is a significant chunk where they don't, and Russia kind of benefits with sanctions on Iran. China would like to have maybe less of them, and I could see Biden, in order to isolate Russia, make like a really sweetheart deal with Iran.
The return,
Um,
trying to return to the Obama status quo.
yes, right. I could see that happening. Now, the biggest benefactor to that would be China, but so would Iran, because Iran, I think, is desperately seeking to go back to Obama era,
Oh yes.
and
Um,
Biden is desperately seeking to crush Russia. That's I don't think there's any doubt about that. So I could see him trying to normalize that. He would have to. The deal would have to be really good, because he would have to pry Iran out of Syria. He would have to um, allow Iran to prosper, and that would allow conflict with Israel and Saudi Arabia, not to mention some of the other um, countries in this Arabian Peninsula. Biden would have to get a guarantee of no aggression towards them. How that would
and he'd
happen,
have to
I
rebuild their
don't
trust
know.
after Trump scrapping the Iran deal because, again, the Iranians, at least on the surface, they
Yes.
said, we don't want another deal. You look, we gave you a chance, and this is how you repaid us. So, look, that's probably a lot of it's probably rhetoric. If they give him a good enough deal, there'll probably be some negotiation there, but it's going to be a much more of an uphill battle than 2015 was.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Like, I mean, I even tweeted like a month ago saying that there isn't going to be another deal, period, if he gets in. I could be wrong about that, but I'm just saying strategically, I if I were America, that's what I would do. Right? That's where I think the weakness lies in that triune of China, Russia, and Iran, is to steal Iran away from Russia. Um, again, Iran also has like it has ambitions that are bigger than uh, I would say just economics.
Oh, yeah. That
They're larger than that, and it will not be easy for for the Americans to convince the Iranians to leave um, Syria. But you can see how it would work, right? Like, suppose Iran leaves Syria and normalcy is returned. Um, all of Iran, the sanctions come off. The money that's being withheld by Iran is given to them. This would be a slow process, mind you. They've already started like a program for making nuclear weapons now, or I'm supposing they are, because the deal is off. And so suppose you can turn all of that around, and then that puts basically like if you can guarantee, like I cannot see how you can guarantee this for Israel, right? And even if you take Israel out of the picture, you still have Saudi Arabia. So I don't know how that deal is going to be made, right? Um, it's but that's where I would say the chink in the armor is. The other is, of course,
pardon the pun, because I was actually just about to bring up China next, which I want to do briefly before we get
yeah.
into the Armenia stuff. But just the question I'll pose to you doesn't have to be like too like solid an answer, but just like a up in the air sort of answer. So okay, in China, Xi Jinping has pretty much solidified sole rule. In 2017, there was pretty much an attempted internal coup against him, where he purged a lot of the elements that were disloyal to him. But something does tell me, this may be gut instinct, could be completely wrong, that there's plenty
Mhm.
of elites of the Chinese Communist Party who would love to return to the status quo of the 90s and 2000s when it comes to their relationship with America. Do you think that if Biden got elected, which that seems like sort of the direction he'd want to take it, that there would be elements within China that I'm not even saying they would remove Xi Jinping, but would try to push him that way, and that they might actually have some success at that.
Uh, you know, it's hard to say. I mean, maybe it's not. I don't see Biden being tough on China, and it's not just because of the rhetoric from you know from Trump's administration or Trump himself or some of the MAGA pundits or whatever. I you know Trump nixed certain trade agreements that Hillary would have upheld, and I think there's too much time that has been lost. I think part of China's success has been to read America correctly. And I think they've used these 4 years with Trump as not merely a reason why to push forward. And when I say forward, I mean that is to become a world superpower. So in a way, Trump has given them the reason to do this, right? And what else it's done is, as you mentioned, it's made America look like an untrustworthy partner. Um, so I don't see him, getting tough on China. And like we mentioned earlier, uh, in the same way that we were saying that some of Trump's policies would have been more effective 10, 15 years ago, um, Biden's policies towards China might have been more effective, 5, 6 years ago, because even Obama really couldn't do much to contain China either.
Oh yeah, and again, one thing Trump campaigned on probably wasn't the main thing that got him elected was American inefficacy in the South China Sea when it comes to, for example, our agreements with the Philippines and the other countries in the region. Now, again, when it comes to Biden, I do think again he would try rapprochement with China. I think a lot of that
He
would.
will.
I think a lot of it would be in vain though, because again, with the current leadership, with Xi Jinping pretty much purging the, I suppose you could say, chimerica elements of the CCP.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I mean, the alliances between Russia and China are too strong right now. He can't. He. I don't see a pathway for him to crack that. Partly because China's need for energy. Let's not forget that Russia is has opened or is about to open the largest delivery of gas infrastructure in the world to China. Um, so I don't see how he can make a rapprochement with China, because I think in some sense China has, let me put it to you this way: China has grown in strength because of Trump. It was always going to grow in strength, though. I think Trump nudged it along to accelerate that relationship. But in the process, China has formed stronger bonds with other countries. And I find it difficult to see how, um, because it is so energy dependent, he would have to coordinate. Like, I don't see any way around it, right? Like, okay, so suppose he guarantees China energy, right? What, with fracking? I don't think so, right? Okay, so then it's like more oil from Saudi Arabia and from Iran. But now you have to also appease Iran too. Like, how do you do that? There's just too many pieces on the chessboard right now.
yeah, I do think, as much as I want a more non-interventionist foreign policy, that in a lot of ways Biden would do just as much, if not more, to knock America down a few pegs on the world stage as Trump. At this point, I think maybe Trump set off, maybe he was a symptom rather than the cause. I think there was a chain of events set off sometime, I don't know, post 2010 that really made a lot of these events inevitable in one way or another.
Yeah. Yeah, like I think China was always going to get here. I don't think Trump is very material to that. I think It's kind of like the culture war in America, in the way that Trump's mere presence in the White House accelerated the culture war because that was their only way to get even, right? They could not cede 1 inch. They could not stop that progress whatsoever. Um, and in a sense, the kind of resistance that Trump brought to China forced China to kind of do the same, to push forward toward where they were going anyways. And I mean, if you watch enough Mearsheimer videos, and he's quite an expert on China. Um, you know, he was already saying this over 10 years ago. He was giving lectures on this, and he goes to China very routinely. And that he said China is, it's a nation and it's a civilization, and it's not going to be content to just be, the largest manufacturing colony for like the West in America. It's not going to stay there.
Yeah, they take them some much more seriously than the West does. Again, you don't even have to like China. I personally have a lot of problems with them, but you can admire that they're more effective as a nation, as an empire, as a civilization than whatever the hell we're doing right here in the West right now.
Mm-hmm.
But with that, I suppose we should move on to the main news topic, which is the shaky peace in Nagorno Karabakh. Now, if you would listen to a lot of media pundits, even people on our side, they would have you believe that Putin, Russia, they just let Armenia down. George Soros had nothing to do with this. The Western elite had nothing to do with this. Again, they're completely to blame. It's that Putler who would literally send cargo planes over the Caspian Sea through Iran and up into Armenia because Georgia blocked their airspace at the behest of Western governments. He just didn't do enough. He just didn't do enough for Armenia there, and only shipments of arms, only offers over the past 4 years to integrate air defense systems and other defense systems, similar to how they did in Syria, where Turkish and Israeli drones get knocked out of the sky on the regular, which is a problem Armenia had. No, it was just Putin because he came in, he addressed the situation with how hopeless it looked and said, you know what? It looks like you're going to have to make a bit of concession because you didn't conduct this war properly. Soros backed Color Revolution Prime Minister Pashinyan, or however the hell you pronounce his name.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
what the other narrative I've been seeing, it's like, oh, this is a terrible day for democracy. When I said this previously, Erdogan and Aliyev, I'm not a fan of either, but they seem to be able to wield an iron fist and rally their nation into war and perform relatively well. And frankly, I think it's Armenia's color democracy, as we'll call color revolution, color democracy, really bit them in the ass. Maybe if Armenia had a bit more of a dictatorial leader, even if he wasn't necessarily pro-Russia, even if he was installed by the West, maybe they would have performed better. Maybe if they would have recognized the autonomy or independence of Nagorno-Karabakh, they would have performed better. I mean, at this point, I think a lot of the Armenian people in Armenia get this, considering the fact they lynched their Speaker of the House last night. That actually did happen, by the way. Quite literally executed him. I mean, probably the only one they get their hands on. I'm surprised it wasn't the Prime Minister, who's probably in a bunker or has fled the country at this point. There isn't much word out of that, but at the end of the day, this, of course, comes after Azerbaijan shoots down the Russian helicopter. Not a Russian helicopter full of mercenaries, not mercenaries shooting down the helicopter, but a government on government forces action. And at which point, Russia issued a threat. They threatened all out war, and they probably came out with the cleanest peace for Armenia it could. Now, perhaps
Yeah.
Russia should have gotten involved sooner. Perhaps Putin did drop the ball on that point. But to say Russia did nothing for Armenia, to say Russia was exactly like Macron, who was all talk and no action, or like the European Union, who wagged their finger at Turkey, or or Trump or Biden, it's patently ridiculous. And what they're exactly trying to do, what a lot of the media narratives about this are trying to do, the media outlets that even report on this are trying to do, again, is what I said they were going to do. Is Armenia was going to take an ass whooping, unfortunately, and then the powers that didn't help them, that pledged all these help to them, would point to it and say, "Look, Russia let you down." I said this like 3 weeks ago. Not to
Yeah.
not to brag or anything, but the point is, like, you should everyone should be able to see this from a mile away. That of course, based Macron wasn't going to come save the day. And yeah, at the end of the day, it's somehow Russia's fault. It seems like a lot of the powers in the region aren't falling for it, but again, just narratively, despite Russia's pretty good victory, considering the fact they pretty much control Nagorno-Karabakh now, uh, fended off Turkish forces and mercenaries at their border, which again prevents the rather slim but still there was still a chance of this spilling over into the Caucasus, which could have been much worse. Which perhaps maybe that deterred some of their intervention, fear of a backlash at home, but at the end of the day, they were the only ones who did something for them when their hand was forced
Yeah.
because they were finally attacked after being spurned for 4 years by Soros-backed puppets, and at the end of the day, they are to blame, according to several people, even several people I considered intelligent. Like a lot of people just looked at this and like, well, how did that happen? And again, I'm not even saying that like Putin is the greatest man in the world. Look, I think he's generally a good leader. I think he's definitely had his fuck ups. I think Syria is full of them. I think Libya even has quite a few of Putin's mistakes just splattered right there. Not to mention Russia's internal thing. Not to mention their conduct in Belarus. I think again, not that it was complete luck, but I think there was a little bit of luck involved there. But to say that he botched this, like, this is probably one of the more effective peace deals he's come to in his 20 some years in office. It's probably the biggest power projection, considering the fact that Russia has de facto control of the Caucasus again.
Right. And, it should be noted that France gave no material aid. France did not sacrifice 2 military men. It was the biggest talker, delivered nothing, which is exactly what I expected from all the Europeans, anyways. And of course, America did nothing. Even Trump boasted that, if he was reelected, you could do something now, but he did nothing. Because as I said, that this was basically, they had the potential to entrap Russia in another conflict along its borders or close enough. I will say this, my gut feeling is once that helicopter went down, I think Putin gave a call, and basically that was it. The war was over. And this is how it was going to be, or else. If you want another Georgia, we can bring it to you. I find it very intriguing that the entire war stops. Remember, he saved also their capital.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, it's so close to that chopper going down and the war ending. I have no doubt that was the red line. It all stops. All this dog and pony show is over right now. This is how it's going to be, and they agreed. That's it.
Yeah, and just the other thing in terms of the narratives that were put out there. Say Armenia, stuck its nose out at Russia and gave them the middle finger. Not Armenia, Azerbaijan gave Russia the middle finger, and Russia had tanks within 15 miles of Baku in 5 days, like they did, with Georgia. What do you think the reaction would have been that Russia trying to impose? There was no narrative win for Russia in this situation because either they let their allies down or they're being aggressive, they're being imperialistic, they're they're invading yet another country. That dastardly Putler, he just can't help himself by being such an evil imperialist. So there was no narrative win, and I don't think that anyone expected that, especially not anyone in the Kremlin. But it looks like in terms of actual gains, in terms of what was actually accomplished, this seems to be pretty good for Russia, all things considered. I figured it was going to be yet another their hands are tied lost, sort of like a situation in Ukraine where, okay, they got what was vital, but at the end of the day, they lost some of it. Or perhaps Belarus, where it's going to be a bit more muddled. Or even, some of the other former Soviet conflicts. Georgia, another example. But looks like out of all the fires they tried to start on Russia's doorstep, this one was stamped out like that. And again, perhaps it did take the direct deaths of Russian active duty troops to bring that about. But, I mean, at the end of the day, you could have Turks in the Caucasus, Turks dominating the Caucasus, them controlling Russia's southern border, etc.
Basically, what has happened is Russian peacekeepers will be there. So if you want to, you're going to have to go through them. So you risk another Georgia situation if you do it. I mean, that's it. This is all Azerbaijan is going to get. I don't know if they're going to be happy with it. It wasn't everything that they lost. So they don't regain everything, but it is going to have to stick because, like again, I think the death of those two military men. I think that was the red line. The war stopped literally in under 24 hours after that happened. Under 24. That's not a coincidence. I would say though that we're going to see probably with the Biden administration, less so with the Trump administration, because I think Trump did actually try to work within a very limited framework with Putin in Syria, much better than what was available for him. Let's say with Obama, or far worse if Hillary got in power. Um, but I kind of see that area of the Caucasus stretching into Central Asia as the point of, again, trying to wedge Russia from China by creating conflicts there. Kind of like, we'll let you expand into the South China Sea. You want like Central Asia. This is essentially Biden addressing Xi Jinping. And so stay out of the way. We're going to make life for Russia very difficult. And so, I'm also not surprised that Trump, again, he hasn't said that he wants to remove the troops from Afghanistan, but it has come out today that Epser, who's been fired, was fired for stopping Trump or convincing Trump not to remove the troops from Afghanistan.
Oh yeah, Esper,
I mean,
and I mean that's pretty much
again,
the
whether
same
Trump
reason
is a
Mattis got terminated over the
yeah,
Syria orders. But it looks like there's something substantial. I think Trump is. I don't think Trump has given up on the hopes of a second term, but I do think he's cleaning house regardless because I don't know. Maybe it took him until now to realize how many snakes were around him, but I guess whatever at that point.
yeah. I mean, again, I don't mean to harp on this point, but whether Trump is a simulation or not of what everybody's hopes were, well, our sphere. Whether that's true or not, there's no tools in the toolbox. They don't exist. The kind of drift, like, how can I put it? The drift that you saw culturally in the media, a similar kind of drift in foreign policy also took place, within the Washington political machine. So no, he's not going to find people that will be completely honest with him or carry out, the vision that he wants. And he's not, I don't think he's particularly politically savvy. I don't think he understands foreign relations very well. His emphasis was always too much in economics. I think he had some good gut instincts about like, some things on Syria, but like him wanting to assassinate Assad, stupid move. Him assassinating Soleimani, another stupid move. So he kind of like, you can tell that he wants to make a certain move that keeps you know himself happy, and whatever, Bibi is happy, the Pentagon is happy. um there is though
He still
some
thinks
kind of,
like a New York real estate man. That's at the end of the day, that's what it boils down to.
right, and he thinks like, I mean, he have two of his wives are from Eastern Europe. He thinks like, yeah, the Russians are just, they're Eastern European people, like, but why does Europe have to get all these refugees and migrants? Why are we even in Syria? Blah blah blah. Like, he's got some general instincts that are that are good, but he's always, from the appearance of things, he's always trying to appease someone else, and so nothing can actually get accomplished. And I'm not grandstanding for him, and I'm not, because I will still to this day never be completely 100% about that guy. For all I know, he is, he himself is a deep fake. But I don't want to dwell on.
Look, all I'm saying is I
We only
voted
have
for
so.
Orange Hitler, and all I got were these tax cuts. That's my take on it. But yeah, I mean, with that, with the Espers firing, at the end of the day, what what we're seeing here, Armenia, everything is just a fundamental shift that really, as I said at the beginning of the show, exists independently of whatever the machinations in Washington are. Now, again, as for this Armenia thing, I think generally they made the best out of a bad situation with all the options considered. I mean, the region could have been taken completely by Azerbaijan and ethnically cleansed. Now, admittedly, Turkey now does have a more solid border with Azerbaijan. There is actually a connection where they can get in with some of the territory ceded, unfortunately. But with all of that considered, I still think this is probably just a patchwork solution where the can will be kicked down the road just a few more feet every time, and
Yeah.
we'll probably see something come out in the next few years. 2022, 2024, 2025. They're probably going to be fighting again if we're going to be honest. Now, of course, that does also depend on the direction that Russia goes, whether they increase or decrease in power, the direction of the European Union, the United States, China, etc. Because if Russia becomes a more formidable power, they can probably use just the threat of force to keep the peace there. However, if something happens where Russia doesn't even necessarily collapse the power, but I don't know, perhaps they take a minor blow in prestige in Syria or perhaps Belarus or somewhere that lowers their credibility just a slightest bit, the respective parties in the region may break out fighting again. And this also does depend very much on the brazenness of Turkey, who, judging on the Turkish reaction, despite the fact they accept the deal, I still feel like they were. I still feel like the Turks feel like they were dealt a bit of a blow considering what they were promised. Again, underwhelming victory to the point where they thought they were going to crush Armenia and make Russia look like a fool, get egg on Putin's face. But I haven't seen any direct reaction from Erdogan. But just from what I've seen from Turkey in general, from Azerbaijan in general, it does look like they are not satisfied. It does look like they got a lot less than they initially bargained for going into this. So, again, at the end of the day, I think there's no real winners to the side. I think Armenia, despite losing a lot, still, it could have been a lot worse for them. And somehow, Russia did manage to come out on top of the situation in Armenia. But again, time will tell how much how long this will play out. My hope is that Russia takes a more integrated role in the region and again acts as a broker and a mediator for these conflicts, and sort of just takes de facto control of the region like they have for centuries. Because I really don't see any other way around it beyond Turkish domination. And between those two choices, I find, even just as a Westerner who is somebody thousands of miles separated from it, I find Russian domination of that very volatile region more palatable than Turkish domination of that region.
Hmm. Yeah, most certainly.
Yeah, because I don't see American or French or any other sort of European or even Chinese presence getting involved there. So again, those are really your two
Yeah,
choices at the end of the day, and I do think that a lot of these smaller countries and not only that region but across the world have realized sort of the limitations of their own power. Like on paper, they're sovereign states just the same as any other country, but at the end of the day, when they actually have to deal with the power dynamics of dealing with countries like Russia and Turkey, hopefully that's a bit humbling to the point where they realize that they can't just take these sort of actions. Referring to both Armenia and Azerbaijan in this case. I mean, Azerbaijan did they were the aggressors in this particular case, but again, in terms of like standing strong, standing alone, defending itself, I think Armenia's pride also, or at least the feelings of a incompetent Soros-backed prime minister expressing that in form of national pride, really did them in the end, to the point where I hope a lot of these smaller countries learn that there's really no shame in cooperating with larger powers, especially in these sort of cases. Because, like I said, maybe it's just the optimist in me, but I see this as having gone so much worse. When this first started, I thought, oh boy, this is gonna be an entire thing of the Caucasus. We're gonna see some shit in Chechnya and Dagestan, wherever. But again,
yeah,
this fortunately did not spill over. But there's a very real risk that in the future, if this is not
absolutely.
handled very carefully.
I would not rule out uh, it's something happening either in Central Asia or in Dagestan or this war or all three in the next 4 years if Biden is elected. Even with Trump in office, I can almost foresee 2 years from now, an attempt by either side to gain more or regain what they lost. It it's a possibility, and the reason that possibility, might maybe increase is it might hinge upon the perception that Russia is stronger than it was in 2020, and that basically Armenia and Azerbaijan are pawns that you can sacrifice in order to destabilize Russia.
Yes.
So there's that potential, but um, maybe it's something else to think about. Let's say with a Biden presidency, is what will Biden's position be on Turkey, especially considering the failed coup under Obama. That was a big deal, and I mean, in a way, I don't think America is completely happy with the way things have gone. Uh, Depends on which America you're talking about, whether Trump administration or Obama Hillary. But I don't think they're happy with Erdogan either way. Um, so that'll be interesting to see if Biden begins putting pressure to oust Erdogan. That's, I think, something both administrations would probably want, but they might want them for two very different reasons. However, they will agree, for instance, on you know toppling him because of Turk's dream, toppling him because of uh, Turkey's cooperation with arms sales from Russia. So I could see maybe those tensions to get rid of Erdogan increasing, and I think that's why he's been very shrewd. I think that's why he's positioning himself as this great, Sunni leader that is going to bring pride to the Muslim world back. Not quite desperate like maybe with Saddam Hussein, but he too, adopted that stance because that's the culture. That's part of the soul of these people, and that's what they connect on.
Yeah, no different
And
than how
he's
centuries there were century of different European countries and kings calling themselves the next Rome. It's
Yeah,
fundamentally it's the same concept.
yes, right. The concept of the catch-a-tone, but so yeah, that would be interesting to see how that proceeds. And again, that's another country where a lot has changed after 4 years.
Yeah, and then the
I
other big
don't.
thing that's going to be interesting with Biden, like in relation to Turkey, is how much do the Democrats still care about the Kurdish cause, and particularly Syria, but just the Kurdish cause in general? Because that's something they've just walloped on Trump on for several years now. He cut funding to the Kurds. He abandoned them to Erdogan. He withdrew from Syria and took away their protection. And they're the Syrian Democratic Forces, quote unquote. So my speculation has always been Biden's further involvement in Syria is going to be in the Kurdish-held areas, which again is going to inevitably create tension with Turkey. At the same time, while pursuing this Russia as the primary threat foreign policy, to the point where there's going to be a lot of contradictions. Which horse does he bet on at that point? Does he value the absolute toppling of Russia and the return to the status quo, or the support of democratic forces and viewing Turkey as part of this quote unquote illiberal cancer, I suppose as our enemies would call it, rising up across the world? So, at the end of the day, something has got to give.
Right. And just today, 4 American servicemen were killed in the northeast pocket of Syria. So, you know, I my guess is, you know, either it's ISIS or either it's, jihadis that work maybe from time to time with Turkey. But well, I was quite surprised by that headline.
Yeah, with the time and place they were killed, it doesn't seem like it would have been by Syrian or Syrian-backed forces, which again is
No,
inevitably the narrative that they're going to paint with this. But I mean, I could see some ISIS or ISIS affiliate just deciding to do that to take out the Western infidel, so to speak. But yeah, again, they're really going to try to spin this. I think they're going to try to make this into the next Russian bounty story. But again, I mean, this one actually did happen, but I mean, the causes will be disputed, and I think we all have learned quite a few things about disputed claims in this past week. Oh boy, but I mean, with that out of the way, I suppose we should move on to some of the European news to wrap this up, and mainly I'm referring to the European Union's finger wagging against Poland and Hungary when it comes to the eternal fight for funding from Brussels. Now, again, their main concern is the so-called human rights violations because these countries haven't submitted completely to the LGBTQCIA. The fact that their populace and their government still put up some pushback against it. Now, Poland and Hungary are the main two. I doubt it's going to stay that because, again, you just had countries like Romania ban gender study. I don't know how far they would stretch this, but I mean, Slovenia still hasn't recognized Biden as his rightful place as the president elect, so there may be some pushback there. But again, it's just yet another division within the European Union. And this is on top of the so called second wave of COVID, and we'll see what this does to the economies of Europe. To the point where it looks like the first wave of COVID has made, I've made this point before, the economies of Southern Europe just in a state of irreparable damage for the foreseeable future. I don't think the Italian economy is recovering, especially not the Greek one, especially not the Portuguese one. Spain would be lucky to recover. So at this time when the European Union is probably at the weakest it's ever been. Now, of course, they just had the blown prestige of Brexit at the beginning of the year. How much of a blow that was, I don't know, but still, nonetheless, a member left voluntarily. And they're going to spend this time, they're in a real crunch. The primary crisis they see because of them being blinded by their own ideology, I suppose I could put it, is Poland and Hungary stepping slightly out of line. Now, you see, when it comes to just this sort of policy, like they tolerate Turkey's sort of behavior and their sort of culture when it comes to the greater purpose of counteracting Russia. They tolerate this sort of behavior from Israel and the Gulf states, but I guess it's just too close to home to tolerate a more illiberal system out of Poland and Hungary, especially Hungary, I guess, when it comes to confronting Russia, because again, Hungary's been more conciliatory, Poland hasn't been at all. But I figured at least Poland would get some, a little bit of leeway to be a liberal when they're on the front line against Russia, supposedly, when they're one of these key players when it comes to being part of the EU. Or I figured, out of that, they would probably ignore that in favor of trying to salvage some sort of patchwork solution out of the Southern European debt crises.
yeah, I mean, one of the things that I see is just to sort of veer away a little bit from Hungary and Poland is um, every country is going to lose some of their economy. They're all going to be negatively affected. For me, the question is, especially with regards to Southern Europe, who's going to capitalize on this? Will it be Sorry, will it be Germany? Will it be the bigger countries who will weather the economic downturn better than the Southern European countries? I mean, I guess that means they consolidate more power, and so maybe recovery for them is easier because they'll absorb more assets. And but again, I have not looked deeply into where this transfer of wealth and power is happening. Is it from which countries is it originating? Because I'm very sure this is also a great opportunity for China, and they too will be capitalizing on this. But as for for Poland and Hungary, I think you don't hear a lot about it, and I think part of that is because they don't want to show any division. But I think, again, I said earlier that if Biden is elected, you're going to see a lot more pressure exerted from Brussels, and this time if Biden selected from America itself.
Yeah,
For
and
Poland, yeah. So
the
we know how this will go.
the other
I mean,
thing
we
you're going
know
to
who.
see is, of course, like the increase in sanctions, which even puts countries that would be presumed to be more in the Western sphere, such as Germany, in more of a bind because, again, Germany with all their energy was Russia, Italy, which is again more or less in the Western sphere, that they have their economic deals with Russia. Sanctions would affect those. I mean, the right wing parties of Germany and Italy have both called for the lifting of sanctions. The European Parliament on a consistent basis. Not only those two, but even again some of the more Eastern European countries, some of the other Western right wing parties have called for this. So it's definitely going to create also that pressure in the European Union, and that plays into I don't know how's Macron's policy going to play into this. I mean, Macron decided to do the 180 and start accusing Russia over Navalny, but before that he was probably on better terms with Russia than the United States was under Trump, which again I don't think anyone really foresaw that. But again, I think the ultimate theme of the show goes back to whether Trump or Biden comes on top of this. Things are going to go in a very similar direction. It's just that the path they take is going to be deviated in at several different key points.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think also it's I I don't want to say it's inevitable for one path or another. Uh, I mean, I personally think that for those generals, for instance, that were on board with the direction that the Obama administrations were headed with regards to global world politics and geopolitics, including all the conflict zones. I think they feel that Trump literally screwed everything up. Um, I think that's what they're using. The emotional soccer mom and the 18-year-old OnlyFans girl and trans kids and gay men to like screech at Orange Hitler. Um, but I think if we're going to be honest about statecraft, then I would think like what's really bothering them is, and what real Russia collusion is that Trump messed up a certain process that was supposed to take place. Uh, one is he did not go hard enough in Ukraine, for Crimea, and Syria. Those are the ones that are glaring. I don't think the Obama cared one way or the other about Venezuela. And again, I think they understood strategically and probably better than Trump that they needed to wrest Iran away from Russia and from China in order to counteract China and Russia. And but that meant alienating Israel to a certain degree. And so and we've gone on the other episodes with Finkelstein and his suggestion to Trump to go with a sort of semi ethno nationalist, semi civic nationalist message about putting America on top again and so on, as if they're not already on top, or as if I mean, yeah, it's decaying, but it's still on top.
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up in terms of the Biden Trump divide. But I don't know. It's going to be very interesting few weeks, and I do think it's interesting that I also said on our previous show that this would give us about a 5 to 6 week window of what a world absent of American hegemony is going to look like, to the point where we get a
Mm-hmm.
peace deal within a day in Armenia, we get some sort of progress in Syria, which I'll just pull up the map to show you what's going on now with the Turkish withdrawals and everything. And again, you haven't heard much news out of East China or East Asia, but I imagine come December, you probably will. Like just those couple weeks before the Electoral College finally decides who's president. But again, you've seen Syria right now, just more and more collapse on the Idlib front as more and more Turkish forces are routed. You see, of course, resurgences of insurgencies near the Israeli and Jordanian border with Syria. No surprise there. Of course, ISIS is resurgent. We talked about the 4 U.S. troops that were killed in Syria earlier, presumably by ISIS or some other jihadist forces, judging on, again, the location and the time and just the circumstances of their deaths. So it it is interesting reporting on a world like this because things were happening rapidly already, but just the complete internal chaos in the United States, not only with the COVID pandemic, not only with the racial tensions, and then to add to all of it an inconclusive election for the quote unquote leader of the free world, things have accelerated to the point where I would have never seen them to. And honestly, at this point, I don't think it really matters who the accelerationist candidate is because we're getting it either way. And yeah, I mean,
That's a great point.
because like okay, the amount of chaos that has happened over this past year and that will happen in the next few weeks, again, I don't think it matters whether Trump gets his other 4 years or Biden comes to office. I think that'll play especially bigger role internally in the direction of the country in the quote unquote culture war. But in terms of American presence on the world stage, again, we went into this beginning of the show. Look at how much American power has diminished since 2013. Biden, just by virtue of being there, by being a familiar face, by being an experienced politician, cannot undo this. And especially if slash when Kamala comes in office due to Biden's health or his mental state or what have you, she's definitely not going to be able to do it. I mean, again, let me just pull up my favorite maps again. You know which ones I'm going for, right? The proposals of the European Union on
Yeah,
what they would
yes.
do in a situation whether Trump was or was not president. Again, on the right hand one, you have what they would do if Trump is president. On the left hand one, you have what they do if Trump wasn't president. The two major consistencies is France and Germany both would seek a more independent policy. Now, again, under Trump, you would have countries like Sweden, countries like Austria, countries like Croatia. You'd have countries that would stagnate the progress of the U.S., such as, again, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Finland, which would strengthen relations under a non-Trump administration. So, again, just take these maps in because I know they're a bit blurry, but at the end of the day, again, dark blue means strengthen, light blue means maintain, light pink means move in a more independent direction, and the dark pink is seek other partners such as China. But I mean, just look at these maps. These maps do not look good for American hegemony in any which way. And again, especially like okay, maybe if France and Germany or even just one of the two said, "Oh, we'll continue on the usual path, even if even if Biden's president, whatever," that would be different. But the fact that your two largest players in the European Union desire a realignment, regardless, I think shows probably one of the biggest significant shifts in American foreign policy and geopolitics since the collapse of the Soviet Union, at least. May you could say the post 9/11 world. And the other thing to keep in mind with these maps is these aren't necessarily the stated positions of these countries, but this is just based on their previous behavior into projections of what they would do and the statements they have made. So again, these aren't official statements, but it's based on again statements they've made in the past and actions they've taken in the past. But I think it's a pretty good assessment what we're looking at right here. And yeah, like regardless of what happens, there's some sort of realignment underway, and it just depends
Mm.
on how it play out. Honestly, I know this goes against a popular opinion for a lot of people, maybe even on this side. I think Trump would save more American face than Biden would because I think Trump, despite everything, maybe inadvertently would just take a less engaged role and let things play out as they were, whereas the Biden administration would actively try to meddle and interfere and change the course of this, which would just make things look worse. But this is the future we're looking at, for better or for worse, and I really don't know what to make of
Yeah.
it. And it's sort of a lot to take in, like after the election, because we speculate about all these things before the election, the months before the election. But even when we don't have a clear winner, the fact that we may have a president that is not Trump, it's still a lot to take in that all these things are happening at the same time.
I would say I would say each administration, both the Obama and the Trump administrations, played each an individual role in essentially dividing Europe and NATO. Uh, you recall when Maidan was taking place, Uh, Before the end of 2014, all the massive uh, sanctions that were placed on Russia, initially they were not well received by Germany and France. They Obama had to bring them in line, but even Polish farmers were upset because now they had to find other markets and so on. And it didn't hurt, really, it didn't hurt Russian industry as much as it hurt basically European products, because it's more European products. Like Europe is always going to need gas, and they're not going to shut off the gas, but Europeans need to sell their products, and Russia is an easy and convenient place with a large population that can buy them. So I would say that was, now begrudgingly they went along and they towed the line, and by mid 2015 they were all on board. They were using the correct rhetoric and all of that, but I don't think they were very happy about it. And it's not just France and Germany, but I would say with Trump, I think him saying that NATO is obsolete, that terrified them in a very different direction. So on the one hand, there's an emphasis on the EU with implicit unity in NATO. And then there's Trump saying, well, NATO is actually obsolete, or let's defund NATO.
Yeah, then Macron just 2 years later calling it brain dead. So the fact that Trump's rhetoric rippled to even leaders that you would expect to be in favor of the status quo. Now, again, you could say Macron's sort of in favor of the status quo, just has a more revolutionary take on it, a more pragmatic take on it, what have you. But again, even the dissatisfaction under Obama wouldn't have manifested itself in such a direct way where the French president would take that sort of position. But
Yeah.
like, this is going to be an interesting show if we don't get banned over the next few years, regardless of who is president. And I have my stash of jokes depending on whether Trump or Biden or maybe a certain Ms. Harris, we could say, just for the sake of avoiding any controversy, is president over the next 4 years. And really, really, I see things going the direction that they're going, but at a much more rapid rate. I think this
Yeah.
election that just happened dealt a massive blow to American credibility, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, even for people on the right, considering the fact that uh, just a lot of people who control the institutions and the agencies in the country are not your friends and would love nothing than to see the, I guess what you could say, traditional American way of life destroyed in favor of a neoliberal hellhole, which, arguably they succeeded. My more pessimistic side says, oh yeah, I mean, that's kind of already happened. But again, at the end of the day, what we're seeing is just these institutions sort of making their last stand. This is their now or never moment. For all we know, this could go the direction of the 1980s Soviet Union, where it crumbles in the dust in less than a decade, or they could just keep on kicking and streaming and fighting, or it could just be that they become more and more depraved and degenerated every year to the point where they just grind themselves in the dust. Or, again, there's a multitude of different things. There are so many hotspots around the world, whether that be Ukraine, whether that be the Balkans, whether that be Syria, Iran, South China Sea, Venezuela, uh, somewhere in Africa. France got a lot of involvement in Africa, so does China. It takes one of these powder kegs to go off for a complete realignment, which we haven't seen since the end of World War One. Which, coincidentally enough, as I record this, this will be the 102nd anniversary of World War One ending by the time this airs. So, you know,
Mm.
uh, I don't know. It's interesting how that all comes together. It's interesting to think how much things have changed in just the past decade.
Yeah. So if Biden is elected, 15 of his 23 Pentagon advisors are women, and that will be a way to remember those who fell in the Great War 102 years ago.
Oh yes, and not to mention Susan Rice finding her rightful place in the White House as either Secretary of State or National Security Advisor. We'll definitely get to see how that plays out and how interesting that is. But
I honestly think, sorry to interrupt, but I honestly think like their decisions to choose women, like on the one hand, is weak. On the other hand, like if you wanted to get if you were looking at a demographic that would hate Russia the most, was most capable of hating Russia, you're looking at a white liberal woman, a Jewish white liberal woman, or a woman of color. That's your demographic. That's who you're looking at. A Newland, um, Samantha Power. You're looking at the demographic that, like, from the get-go, is going to hate Russia and what kind of a country Russia is. So, there's a logic to it.
Oh yes, and yeah, I mean, as I said last episode, I think what we're getting right now is the beginning of the 21st century in the cultural and political context. I think we're just now witnessing the end of the cultural and political 20th century, and something new is happening, and what that will hold, again, time will tell. All I can say, it's going to be chaotic. So, you know, just don't do anything dumb. Stay safe. If you're going to go to any like political activism, that's honestly up to you. That's your personal choice. But just stay safe. Watch out for people who would goad you into doing things that are illegal or immoral. And at the end of the day, come back to the war report.
You guys DM me. I'm going to be the with the Alex Jones caravan.
Oh boy,
So
you too, you too.
you too.
Yeah, we're gonna go redact some redacted, guys. It's gonna be a great time. I'll meet you redacted. But I suppose that's all for this episode, unless you have anything else.
No, that's it for me.
So thank you everyone for tuning in to this episode of the Warport. Sorry about some of the other technical difficulties, the car alarm earlier, maybe some dog noise, the slamming of the door. Yeah, you know how it is when you have your windows open. Again, I guess keeping my windows open has caused me quite a bit of hassle this episode. So perhaps we'll have to do away with that next episode. Unfortunately, it's very nice to have that breeze coming in here. So, but I will inconvenience myself and make myself less comfortable for you, the dear audience, because that's just the kind of person I am. And that is why you will come back next week and enjoy another episode of the War Report. So thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you. Take care.